Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this webinar on the public consultation about type design data with relevant effects to the operational context. I'm Reinaldo Egas, and before we start, I'd like to invite the head of the Airworthiness department, Roberto Honorato, for his initial words.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming, for joining this webinar. This webinar is a way that ANAC is pursuing to involve more public to our ruling making. As you may know, we are going to revise our regulation regarding to type design data relevant to operational scenario. So I encourage everyone to participate in this webinar. We are going to see the proposal from ANAC, and it will be open for questions. So we are pursuing this good connection with the industry. It is a continuity of an event that we have in 2021, in which we hear the public from Brazil and for all over the world for this matter. So thank you for coming, and I wish a very good event for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. And just before we proceed with the presentation, I'll present me and my colleagues, and I'm Reinaldo Egas. I work in the Airworthiness Standards and Innovation branch in the Airworthiness department. And with us today, we have André Caetano and Tiago Menezes, both from the Flight Engineering branch. We have João Fajardo, who works in the Certification Programs branch, specifically with supplemental type certification. Representing the Civil Aviation Personnel Department, we have João Maia Jr., who is the head of the Standards branch. And we also, in representing the Flight Standards Department, we have Ednei Amaral, who is the Deputy Head of Operations Standards branch. Just a moment, I'll share my screen here. Just before we start, I want to make sure you can see the screen. Okay, let's go. So just some initial considerations here. During this event, the main purpose is to explain the regulatory impact assessment we did on this matter, detail the changes we're doing to the regulations, to the RBACs, which are the Brazilian regulations. We'll show you how to participate in the public consultation and send your contributions, and we'll clarify any doubts about this process. It's not our intention to detail supplementary instructions. They are under development, and they are expected to be ready by the end of this normative process. And we will not write down contributions to the consultation, because this is the purpose of this event is to clarify any doubts, and in the end you have still at least 1 month for providing your contribution through the contribution form I'll show you by the end of the presentation. For your participation, this event is being streamed live by YouTube, so you are following us by YouTube. You can send an email to gtni.sar@anac.gov.br, or simply scan this QR code here and you send a message to us. I'll be monitoring the inbox. And for those of you who joined us by WebEx, you can raise your hand, and we'll allow you to open your audio and video if you want. And I'd like to, if possible, to leave the questions by the end of the presentation, but if you have an important issue, you can just raise your hand and we'll answer as soon as possible. So just a general overview of this subject. The title is Type Design Data with Relevant Effects to the Operational Context. It's the origin of it was a suggestion we received during the public consultation for the regulatory agenda for the 2021 and 2022. And the suggestion was for adopting the ASA operational stability data model. By the time we were already discussing some problems related to MMEL, and we took the opportunity to include pilot training criteria which is equivalent to the flight crew data from NASA. However, we preferred not to include the other OSD elements from NASA, cabin crew data, maintenance staff training data, and simulator data, because we believe that would be a change that would be too big for the moment, and we also took into consideration the EASA experience on that. Talking about the regulatory agenda, it's the way ANAC lists the priority subjects to be addressed along a 2-year period. And we list both the teams that we consider important from ANAC side and from society, so that we have we encourage transparency and social participation. And in this team specifically, we are in the 3rd stage of the normative process. We finished the regulatory impact assessment that I'll detail right after this slide. Then we went to really make a proposal in which we actually write the regulation changes, and then we submit this change to public consultation. The public consultation lasts for 45 days. It started on April 3rd, and it goes until May 18th. And we are issuing the beginning of this time, so you have basically 1 month to study the changes and propose and give your opinion and contributions. After that, we compile the contributions, evaluate if they should be accepted or not, and submit to the final decision stage. It goes to the Office of Attorneys in ANAC before going to the decision of the Board of Directors. Then I'll talk about, we start now the regulatory impact assessment phase. This is the first stage in the normative process, and it's the most important one. It's where we actually go deep into the problems until we identify an actual option and implement it. So it basically has 9 stages that we did throughout the time, and the most important aspect here is that we always started by studying the problem and the root cause. We never started with a ready solution for a given problem, and that's also the reason why we chose not to give it as a title for this subject, implementing OSD in Brazil, because we didn't know in the beginning if that would be the model that we would choose or not. So I prefer to have a neutral subject and detail afterwards. After that, we evaluate which are the stakeholders involved, the legal basis for ensuring that ANAC is competent to addressing the issue. After that, we list the desired objectives. We create a network of objectives coming from top-level objectives that we extracted from the strategic plan from ANAC, and you break these objectives down according to the specific subject we are studying. We did an international benchmark, and after that we are at a stage where we can list possible actual alternatives. We know the problem well, and then we can think of possible paths to be followed. Then for each of the possible paths, we do an impact assessment. We evaluate the pros and cons and compare them so that by the end of the process we can choose an alternative and trace the implementation strategies for that. Two highlights here, as Roberto told in his initial presentation. In 2021, we did a series of events when we were studying this problem. I'll have a slide for that soon. And we also did meetings with FAA and NASA to understand their vision on these problems, and also how EASA implemented the OECD back in 2014. So talking about the EASA OECD model, just make sure that everyone's on the same page. I think this is common knowledge for most of you. But what is the OECD? OECD was a change that the EASA implemented in their initial airworthiness regulations, in which these 5 elements, the MML, Master Minimum Equipment List, flight crew data, cabin crew data, maintenance certifying staff data, and simulator data, they were included as part of the type certificate. And by doing so, they created a bridge from the certification side to the operational side. And before this regulation, it was these issues were most dealt with from the operational side. And an important aspect of this model is what they call the 4-box model. That was a way for not mandating everything on the OECD to everyone. So how does it work? From the manufacturer side or the STC holder side, there are data that are required from them, and there are data that are at the request of them, that are optional. And from the end user side, either the aircraft operator, the pilot, or the training center, there are data which are mandatory and the data that are just recommended. So this 2x2 combination makes this 4-box model. As I told you before, back in April 2021, we had a series of events for studying and discussing the problems related to MML and operational evaluation. And we had 2 days dedicated to manufacturers and 2 days for STC providers. For STC, since we have a diverse public, we had one event in Portuguese and one in English. And as an example of what was done there, we had some interactive sessions. Some of you were present there, in which, for example, we had a blank slide which put the pros and cons of each model here, and the participants could fill out their opinion and what was good or bad from each side. And this and all the discussion we had helped us a lot on the decisions we made in this process. We'll now go to MML, and just as a brief start, make sure that all of you know what's MML, and I know it's also a common knowledge for most of you. The MML is the document that's prepared by the manufacturer, considering the design of the aircraft. It's the master minimum equipment list, but it's not the document that it is actually used by the aircraft operator. The aircraft operator needs to develop his own MEL, the minimum equipment list, and how that works. The operator will take the MML and will remove the items that are not applicable to his aircraft or to his aircraft configuration, and also will adapt it considering his operational environment and their specificities. And as a simple conclusion is that the MEL shall always be equally or more restrictive than the MML. In terms of regulatory problems, on MML, the center, the root cause we identified was that we have a superficial or shallow regulation. We don't have requirements in RBAC. We have just procedures in supplementary instructions, and therefore this leads to a series of problems and consequences. And talking about a design, that Brazilian design, when it's going to be validated abroad, we have a limited international recognition. Since we don't have a strong requirement basis, it becomes more difficult to obtain international recognition. And as a consequence, the Brazilian applicant needs to many times have a multiple approval process for the MML, double, triple approvals. On the other side, when for a foreign design that's being validated in Brazil, it's the opposite. The same lack of a strong regulation makes us accept automatically any foreign MML, and as a consequence in Brazil, different operators of aircrafts coming from different countries may have different relief policies for the same system. And I think a good example is related to dispatching an aircraft with an inoperative door with passengers. In EASA, that's it is possible with several limitations, operational limitations, since that door won't be able to be used in case of an evacuation. However, for FAA, that's not acceptable. So if we compare similar aircrafts from similar sites in Brazil, they would be subject to different relief policies. And internally in Brazil, we also have two important problems here. Most of Brazilian STCs, they don't have MML. As a consequence, if there's a failure involving equipment of that STC, either the aircraft will be grounded or the aircraft will be operated in violation of the operational regulations. So that's an important issue. And also have, also based on that, the lack of a strong regulation, we have legal issues related to the MML approval when there's a relief that goes against other regulations. Then the ANAC servant may face a difficulty in finding if that relief can actually be authorized or not. Now move to the operational evaluation. I also have a basic slide here with a general concept. So what is operational evaluation? It's a way that the aviation authorities, along with the manufacturers, they do a campaign for determining which is the type rating for that aircraft, determining if there are related aircraft, which is if candidate aircraft can have some sort of operational commonality with base aircraft, and also for determining the specifications for training, checking, and currency when issuing a type rating for that model or configuration. Two highlights: the difference levels when we are comparing two aircraft to identify if they can be related. The difference can range from level A, which would be just a self-instruction from the pilot, no formal training required, to level E, in which an aircraft or full flight simulator is required. And in that case, in most of the cases where level E exists, a new type rating, a separate type rating will be required. And another highlight is related to the training areas of special emphasis containing the equipment and systems that somehow affects either the pilot interface or in the procedures, and therefore require that the training for the type rating address those systems or equipment. as an example, to show how the different levels are important, they can benefit both manufacturers and operators. If a pilot wants to go to the full initial training for 787, typically it'd be required 20 days of training plus 7 simulator sessions and a check session. However, if that pilot already has a type rating for the 777 and is just migrating to the 787, then only 5 days of training with 1 simulator session and 1 check session are required. So we're dividing the training workload by 4. That's a huge difference, and we're talking about a difference level D. So it's really very important activity that is done. In terms of how the operational evaluation is done, fortunately, it's a subject that has a very good level of standardization internationally, and part of that is due to this forum, the IOEPB, International Operational Evaluation Practices Board, in which the authorities from CMT, Education Management Team, that's FAA, EASA, TCCA, and ANAC in Brazil, they discuss how that is done, and they always seek to the most of standardization. Therefore, even though there are different regulatory models between FAA and NASA, the way the operational evaluation is done, it has a very good level of standardization. We talk now about the regulatory problems related to operational evaluation. So we listed here 3 important cases, and then we'll study their consequence. The first case is related to Brazilian STCs and part of foreign STCs, especially those that do not comply with EASA or OECD regulations. And what happens if there's an STC that affects an aircraft which has type rating, and that STC has an effect that would require a particular training to the pilot? Typically, an operational evaluation is not done for that. The second case, it affects most of foreign designs, and what happens is that when there's a validation here in Brazil, and during the initial issuance of the Brazilian type certificate, the operational evaluation campaign is done. However, after the CE is issued, the aircraft design evolves, and over the years, the different configurations, new avionics, and so on, they are introduced, and not necessarily the operational evaluation is updated afterwards. And the third case is this is very internal to Brazil. When a pilot is applying for a type rating, it might happen. The basic rule is that the pilot shall go through an aviation training, equivalent to a type rating training organization. But in case there's no training center certified by ANAC or validated by ANAC, it is possible that another pilot which is qualified on the aircraft trains this candidate pilot, and then the type rating is issued for this candidate pilot. And what happens here is that not always the operational evaluation report is used as a reference for training this candidate pilot. Since here the training is not done under a supervised organization. There's not the same oversight that we have for a training organization, for example. And this issue here has already been addressed. The supplementary instruction that covers the issuance of type ratings, it has been revised last year, and now the use of the operational evaluation report is part of the activity. The consequence of these 3 issues that I just mentioned is that we have a lack of standardized pilot training reference, leading to an unstandardized training, and in the worst case, a possible training below minimum safety standards. So these were the main problems. We will not detail here each and every stage of the impact assessment phase. I'll start now the alternative, the list of alternatives. So which action options we imagine for this subject. The first option in any subject is considered at least as a comparison. That's the status quo. That means we always consider doing nothing, and therefore do, of course, keep the problems. And as a positive aspect of this option, it's the one that has minimum impact to foreign manufacturers, especially due to MMELs that are automatically accepted in Brazil. A second option we imagine will be the alignment amongst the CMT authorities, so that ANAC, FAA, and NASA and TCA will have a maximum mutual recognition level. However, that's an idealistic option. That's a utopic to imagine that we could, at least not at this stage, make FAA and NASA have the same regulations. And this was an option that we considered to have to see which would be the best possible outcome. Then we considered the EASA model, introducing the OSD model in Brazil. The main characteristic of it being the OSD as part of the type certificate, and being part of the type certificate brings the most benefits and also the most problems of that option. The main benefits is that it's the most robust and the safest model. And another benefit is that since most manufacturers, they already validate their designs in EASA, they already comply with those regulations. So if we implemented that for those manufacturers, it wouldn't be an additional burden. However, the higher robustness also brings higher costs to those that still do not have to comply with them. And that's, I would say, mostly the most affected ones would be Brazilian STC developers and also STC holders from FAA. And also there will be a higher cost to ANAC. It's important to remember here that in EASA, as a basic rule, manufacturers, they have to hold a design organization approval. And even though we have a similar regulation in Brazil, so far we don't have any Brazilian GOA issued. And therefore, most of the burden related to the OSD approval would still remain at an ANAC. And another problem, also related to foreign STCs, is that when importing an aircraft to Brazil, the STCs need to be validated here. And if a given STC holder is not willing to validate in Brazil because we created a burden they're not willing to comply with, they just might say, I'm not interested. And then for that aircraft, either they should remove the STC or give up from importing the aircraft. So this is also a very critical issue in this option. Was considering adopting the FAA model, and it's basically what we have in terms of written regulations, similar to what we have today, but FAA does things that we currently do not do here in terms of procedure. In terms of benefits, there will be a small gain over the status quo. However, it's a model that we see it is less probable to find international recognition, and especially because without having the rules written in the regulations, it's basically based on procedures and orders, it becomes harder to obtain, to seek for international recognition. And the last option we imagined was an improvement package, which is basically deal with the problems without binding to an existing model. Sorry for the typo here. What we did, we took the EASA model as a basis, but we didn't include that as part of the type certificate. So as a benefit, it would solve the problems satisfactorily and would have more international recognition than we have in the current scenario in option A0. However, even though it's there's a lower burden than the EASA model, there is still a burden for some foreign manufacturers and the SC providers, especially those that do not comply with EASA regulations. Based on these pros and cons, we consider these two options as the finalists, let's say, the final ones, and based on that, we did a more detailed evaluation to choose which would be selected. In this slide here, what I did to decide was a multi-criteria analysis, in which we established 4 criteria: safety, cost to Brazilian regulated agents, cost to foreign agents, and cost to ANAC. We didn't put harmonization here because we considered that harmonization was already embedded into these 4 criteria. And when evaluating the criteria, in this image here, we took the status quo as a reference, and then we identify which is better and what's worse for each option. So in terms of safety, as I had told before, the EASA model is the safest one. However, the improvement package, we consider that it already solved most of the problems, even though it doesn't have the same level of robustness as the EASA model. In terms of cost for Brazilian agents, we consider that even though there's a burden in the EASA model, since the manufacturers that validate their designs in EASA, they already have to comply with the OSD model, there's not a big additional cost. So that's why they would have the benefits with a very low burden. That's why there's, in terms of cost, that's the best one. The option, the improvements package, on the other hand, it still has some room for cost reduction, as we can seek for international recognition. However, on the other 2 criteria, both options, they are worse than status quo. For foreign agents, both the improvements package and the EASA model, they bring an additional burden, and that's because we'll do things that we're not currently doing. For example, for the MML, that there might be a difference. And for the EASA model, it's even worse because of the additional requirements and the additional robustness that the model contains. And for an ANAC side, would go from the current level to a slightly higher workload related to the new activities related to foreign MMLs and foreign STCs. However, if we went to the OSD model, there will be a significant burden internally, and that would mean that we would probably need to take our personnel from other certification activities to be involved in the OSD approval. And that's even worse, as I told you, without a GOA approval. So based on that, we chose in the end the improvement package. They were, in terms of, let's say, rates, they were very close one to each other. But since considering the drawbacks of the EASA model, now in the Brazilian reality, we chose to go to the improvement package. And that's the end of the impact assessment slides. As I had told before, this is just a summary of what has been done. There are other stages that we thought we didn't need to detail here. And now we'll go through the actual regulation changes, with what we're changing in our RBACs. First, the main highlights. In terms of MML and MEL, we have updated definitions. We have a new requirement for in part 21 for MML, and in that requirement, the MML is mandatory from a given aircraft size and only for applications for new models. And it remains voluntary for any non-required aircraft, of course, and for STC and TC changes, but in those cases, they would be subject to restrictions by an ANAC. I'll explain that later. For operational evaluation, we also have a new operational evaluation requirement in part 21, and it remains typically voluntary. It won't be mandatory for those applicants willing to credit to obtain the benefits of the operational evaluation, such as having the same type rating for multiple models. For STC and TC changes, it remains voluntary, but it's the same as for MML. ANAC might restrict an existing operational evaluation report depending on the impact of that change. And finally, we also had some improvements in the part 6.1 related to type rating issues. So in terms of definitions, the change definitions. For MML, we improved the definition, and for example, we changed the term list to an approved document. Document, because it has a wider scope, the document includes the list of items that can be inoperative, but also the preamble, the operational and maintenance procedures, and so on. And approved, this has a link with another definition in the RBAC 1. That's when you say approved, that means either approved by ANAC or recognized by ANAC as approved. So that, of course, we're not willing to approve each and every foreign MML. We'll take the foreign, the state of design approval as a basis, and we'll eventually only require a supplement or something, or another mechanism for differences in which Brazil is more restrictive than the state of design. And another point we include here is the word temporarily, just to make sure that's essential for it is not staying indefinitely inoperative. The MEL definition was basically updated in order to be harmonized with the MML definition. Now we'll go to the most important changes. They were done in the RBAC 21, the product certification requirements. And since both MML and the operational evaluation requirements were proposing, they affect several subparts from the part 21, type certification, supplemental type certification, modifications. We opted to have a single requirement in subpart A, which covered the general aspects. Since we didn't have an available numbering here, we had to put this A and B suffixes so that they would fit in the existing subpart A. Now I'll talk first about the MML requirements. So the first item in the MML requirements is related to safety. It's this requirement we basically translated it from the ASA regulation. Here it's the English version, but the important is just translation of that. And the most important aspect here is that is when you say that the MML shall ensure an acceptable level of safety as intended by the applicable requirements. So when you say as intended by the applicable requirements, we're saying that it's not our intention to comply ipsis literis with each whenever an operational or design regulation requires an equipment to be installed. And the way this is done is basically a safety assessment for identifying if that given item can remain inoperative and how long it can remain inoperative. The second requirement is just to ensure that all MML items, they need to be technically justified according to methods acceptable to an ANAC. And whenever we say methods acceptable to ANAC, we're linking this to a supplementary instruction that will further detail that at a later stage. In item C related to the availability of the MML. Currently, ANAC publishes all approved MML, all MML that ANAC approves. However, this is a mixture of how FAA works, in where they actually issue the MML. But however, in Brazil, we just approved the MML, so it makes more sense to consider it as a document from the type certificate or supplemental type certificate holder, and then becomes the obligation of the holder to make the document available. And we put here to make it available to any interested person, because then would we keep the same availability level we have today. Also, another important aspect here, it's similar to EASA, ensuring that the manufacturer must make the document available. It doesn't mean that it's free of charge. It's similar to other ICA, such as a maintenance manual or a parts catalog. The owner of the document has the intellectual property of it and may charge for its availability. Then we continue with the MML requirements. And in letter G, we have the requirement for new models. And this requirement is applicable, as I had told before, starting from a given aircraft complexity. And we choose that airplanes having one or more turbine engines or a large rotorcraft. Large rotorcraft here, it's not just a Part 29 helicopter. It's more flexible than that. When you say it's a large aircraft in which it has MTOW, a maximum takeoff weight of more than 5,670 kilograms. And so it's beyond the separation from Part 27 to Part 29. And this requirement becomes applicable after 6 months of the publication. So we eventually may round up the date, so make for 2024 or 2025. And the compliance, it doesn't need to be done before the issuance of the type certificate. This is similar to EASA. There's a provision here to allow the manufacturer or the manufacturer to obtain the approval before the aircraft is operating in Brazil. So if the aircraft is being in the first moment being operated only abroad, then the manufacturer would just have to comply with the local authority requirements. Letter E has a similar requirement, but this is for modifications, type certificate modifications, and STCs. And the main difference here is that we have this except as provided in paragraph F. So the applicant typically would have to comply with the regulation. That means demonstrate that the modification do not adversely affect the approval of the MML, or obtain approval of MML supplement covering the modifications. And the exception we put here in F is just to say that if the applicant opts does not comply with those provisions, ANAC may limit the use of MML items affected by the modification. When you say may limit, that means that we'll evaluate the risk and the criticality of the modification, and in case we see that the existing MML needs to be limited, then we include the limitation for any aircraft having that modification or that STC. Now talk about the requirement for aircraft operational evaluation. This one, it's not the operational evaluation remains voluntary for everyone. It's only required for applicants willing to obtain the benefits of the results from the operational evaluation. So that's why we wrote the requirement saying that the applicant shall perform an operational evaluation campaign if intended to obtain the determination of one of the following, for example, a single type rating for 2 models. So in that way, the applicant of the type certificate is not, or STC, may choose not to do the operational evaluation. The need for that is for aircraft that for which a type rating is required, and here in Brazil we opted not to bring to Part 21 the determination of a type rating. Not the determination, but the establishing if a type rating is required or not. That remains in Part 61. It's important also to emphasize the type rating requirement here in Brazil. It's more flexible than abroad, typically more flexible. For example, for helicopters here, smaller helicopters can be operated with a class rating, and in Europe, a type rating is required for most of helicopters. And for the second item B here, it's what you do in case there's an STC or a modification that could appreciably affect previous determination in terms of operational evaluation, and the applicant do not do an additional operational evaluation campaign. So what will happen if these 3 conditions occur is that we could limit the existing operational evaluation report. So that was the trigger we imagined for not moderating a revision of the operational evaluation for every STC or TC changes, and there's a strong link with the validation of foreign STCs in Brazil. Those were the changes on the Part 21. And now we'll see why we're changing in Part 61. This is very only spot changes here. First, I put this requirement, the 61.213, which is for the issuance of a type rating And what I wanted to highlight here is that this requirement has been recently revised in February this year, and during that revision, this term was included, following a minimal syllabus established by ANAC. And this new term here, we use that to make the linkage to the operational evaluation report. This requirement here, it's specifically for those cases in which there is not a training center certified or validated by ANAC, as I had explained before. So this one here, no change since the last changes were enough to cover the purpose of this subject. The following requirement, the 61.215, it's for the maintenance or reestablishment of the validity of type ratings. We revised it just to harmonize with the previous requirement to put the same text here. And that's the same for 61.219, which is a new requirement, and we are updating it just to harmonize with those two previous ones. Coming back here to another requirement that's being revised, it's the 61.217 to relate to the privileges of the holder of type rating. The main idea behind this requirement is that the privileges are limited to the aircraft that in which the aircraft model in which the pilot was trained. So if the pilot is willing to operate another aircraft model that has the same type rating, then either a self-instruction or a difference training needs to be done depending on the difference level. And the change here is to ensure that the requirement applies not only when operating a different model, but also when operating a different configuration of the same model. And that's why, since aircraft designs evolve a long time, they have new avionics, new features, and those new features may affect the pilot training. So we want to make sure that if the pilot is moving from one configuration to another, that he is properly trained before operating the aircraft. So I just explained this slide. So that's what I had to say about the RBAC chains. Those are the requirements that are subject to are under public consultation right now. And now we'll talk about some planned normative changes. It's basically the main aspects that we're going to change the supplementary instructions for implementing those regulation changes. So these supplementary instructions, they are not part of the public consultation. So this is just a reference to give you more details of how we are seeking to implement that. The first supplementary instruction is the one for MML. And this one, they came from an old regulation, which was an IAC 3507, which was a regulation issued before ANAC existed. And that regulation covered both MEL and MML. And basically it followed the FAA model. When we issue this IS here, we just adapted the text from the IAC, so it requires an extensive revision. The main changes we implemented, we detailed the new MML requirements. We included the definition and what we consider an approved MML, as we explained before. And we also make a reference to future MML policies issued by ANAC and how that work. Currently, we don't have those policies, And in the beginning, we consider the FAA as a regulation as a reference for accepting foreign designs. And as ANAC goes deeper into the details and issues, we issue our own policies containing differences from those authorities, then we'll take those into consideration. So once we issue those policies, how we expect that to work? Or in case the ANAC position for a given subject or system, if we are more flexible, then an MML supplement would be at request of the manufacturer. That means that we're not. It doesn't mean that if we have a more flexible policy, the manufacturer might just think that no, it's not my intention to take credit of that, or there's no problem. That's the minimum level of safety. The manufacturer prefers to have to be at a safer level, at a higher level of safety. No problem. We want to enforce a foreign manufacturer to make their MML more flexible than it is. On the other side, if ANAC has a more restrictive policy when compared to the state of design, then we'll have a mechanism for limiting the original MML. We're still studying how to do that. Of course, MML supplement is an option, but we're also studying other possibilities. Now going to operational evaluation, we have this IS, the 00-007, and we'll be doing only a limited revision, since, as I explained before, the way operational evaluation is done is already very well harmonized internationally. And main change will be providing further details on the operational evaluation requirements. We'll keep the technical procedures and do some spot adjustments. And finally, on the operational side, for the IS 61005, which that will require training for the issuance of or renewal of a type rating. As I had told before, it has been revised recently, and it's at a good stage in terms of how the operational evaluation report shall be used for a pilot to obtain a type rating, and that's especially important in those cases where the training is done without a training center. So we are just planning some spot adjustments. And for certified operators, either air taxis or air carriers, the supplementary instructions for operations training program, in Portuguese the acronym is PTO. They are under revision. There are already draft documents that are in final phase of development. And in those revisions, there will be an improvement in the link between the operational evaluation report and its utilization by aircraft operators. Important point here is that it was a position from Flight Standards Department to make sure that the operational evaluation report is a reference for obtaining the approval of the operations training program. That means that it's not our intention to enforce its use ipsis literis, because each operator might have its own operational scenario and specificities, and eventually there might be alternative means of compliance considering the operator resources, which equipment, which is simulators they are going to be used, and any other sort of specificity that could affect the training. That's what I had for the technical part of the webinar. Now we'll go into details of how you can submit your contributions to the public consultation before we open for any doubts. So here particularly the public consultation paging for ANAC in Brazil, it is in Portuguese. So what I did, we put in the news release for the public consultation, in the news release in English, we put a link to all of the documents, so that if you read the news release, you have access to all of the documents. And more important than that, we translated the main documents into English. That's the justification and the comparative charts, so that even though the regulation is written in Portuguese, you'll be able to understand what's being changed and provide your contributions to this subject. Also, the contribution form, it's bilingual. It's Portuguese in Portuguese and English. So, and it's also for encouraging participation of the foreign companies and professionals. So here's a small print of a comparative chart. We put in the first column the current regulation. We put in any reference regulation from another country here. And then in the third column, we have the revised regulation, and you can see everything that was changed. And then we have the rationale behind each of those changes. And we made sure to have this rationale as detailed as possible, so that after reading this document, you understand why a given change was proposed, change or inclusion was proposed. The justification document that I had before, it has a high-level. It's a high-level document containing the legal competence. It has a summary, a very brief summary of the impact assessment, so you can understand the main points we address it. And it also has the highlights for normative changes. So after reading this, it's similar of the highlights I had shown you earlier in this presentation. And finally, the participation form. This we created it in Lime Survey. It's an official ANAC address here. It's anak.gov.br. And in that form, you'll be able to provide up to 5 contributions per form. If you have further contributions, no problem. You can just fill out additional forms. It's also possible to upload files and submit them as part of your contribution. Another reminder here is that not only the changes in RBAC were submitted to public consultation, also the regulatory impact assessment itself, it's part of the public consultation. So if you have any point that you do not agree, or you think it was not the most adequate path to be followed in terms during the impact assessment, you can submit your contribution as well. So that's what I had to present to you, and now I open for any doubts you might have. Remind here that those at WebEx, just raise your hand and they'll be able to open your audio and video if you want. And those participating by YouTube, you can send your email, just scan this QR code and you'll be able to send an email to us. I'll be monitoring here the the contributions. So anyone, also any our colleagues from ANAC would like to make a contribution. I don't know if it was clear, if you could explain, if you understood the changes and the problems. Okay, I can see here, then Meadows from Boeing. Please go ahead.
Okay, yes. First, thank you for the presentation. That was excellent. Helped clear up many things in my mind of what you're doing and why. So, as I'm understanding it, the implementation will be based on the application for a new type certificate or STC, and that it's voluntary for amended type certificate activities and or changes to the STC. Is that correct?
Yes, actually not only for a new type certificate, but if there's an application for a new model within the same type certificate, it's also applicable.
Okay, so a new minor model would also be part of that that implementation.
Yeah. Typical modification would be voluntary, but in case there's an aspect that we think that will be critical or important over a current an approved MMEL or on operational evaluation report that has been issued, then we might consider limiting those determinations for aircraft embodying those modifications. I don't know if my colleagues Caetano and Tiago or Fajardo would like to complement that.
No, Reinaldo, this is André Caetano here. I think it's pretty much that. You mentioned it all, yeah.
Okay, and so I'm trying to understand you mentioned that you would be looking at the state of design as the basis or the primary or the baseline MMEL, and that you would possibly then have a supplement or another mechanism that would be ANAC specific. And so
Correct.
I'm trying, so I was initially wondering if, because you're going to the OSD model, does that mean that you would start aligning with, in Boeing's case, the EASA document, the EASA MMEL, but it sounds like that's not what you would be doing. You would still be AA as the primary document.
Yeah, even though we chose the improvement package and in regulatory terms, we used more EASA as a basis. The main difference is that we didn't put the MMEL and the personal evaluation as part of the type certificate. So that's the main difference in EASA. And in terms of policies, the technical policy for MMEL, that doesn't mean that we're following EASA. No, I don't know if Tiago, Fajardo would like to complement that. They are the MMEL specialists.
Hi, this is Tiago. You are correct, Reinaldo. The EASA inspiration was primarily in the way that the items in the MML should be assessed and justified. Regarding the policies, right now ANAC has not its own policies written, but along the time we plan to discuss what are the policies already released by FAA and the EASA, and point out what are our positions regarding it. We already know that we are some different opinions in some of them, but at the start, operators and manufacturers won't have any impact about this new regulation, because our plan is to still accept as it is FAA and EASA MMLs. The changes are going to take place over the time.
Okay, and so in that thought of if the FAA document is the baseline for the MMEL for the Boeing airplanes, part of the conversation that we had with FAA and EASA as we were implementing OSD and the validation process was trying to understand the certification basis, because in OSD that is part of the certification of the airplane. Then there's a certification basis for it associated, and it's listed in the type certificate data sheet as that's the requirement for certification for that OSD. The difficulty being with the FAA, it is not a certification document, so there is no certification basis to include as a reference in the case of EASA type certificate data sheet or ANAC as well. So I'm curious to understand is there going to be a validation process similar to what's been put in place for certifications with EASA and the FAA? Is that the intention? And if so, we can share the conversations of what we did for certification basis for the MMEL in those cases.
Okay. I think I can answer that. I don't know, Tiago, feel free if you want.
No, you can proceed.
Okay.
I make arrangements.
So in terms of the certification basis, and that's basically due to the fact that the OSD is part of the type certificate. So here in Brazil, our option is not to include that as part of the type certificate, and therefore we wouldn't have a MML or operational evaluation or something similar into the certification basis, and that wouldn't be listed in the TCDS. What might happen is in terms of the actual policies for MML. So in the first stage, we'd consider both FAA and NASA as acceptable, and they would be a starting point to reference. And a long time, if there are cases in which ANAC has a policy that is more restrictive than that from the state of design, then that's the case where we might implement a mechanism for eventually limiting the original MML. But that's the last case. And we actually don't expect to have a large amount of policies here. We don't want to, let's say, reinvent the wheel, but there might be cases in which our position might be either more flexible or more restrictive than a given state of design. I don't know, Tiago, if you want to complement that.
Yes, I can explore another aspect of his question. What I might say is that the intention, ANAC is not targeting FAA or EASA MML with these regulations. As Reinaldo explained previously in previous slide, today we accept MMLs coming from every country. We are comfortable with the process undergoing in the approval of FAA and EASA MML, but this may not affect when we're talking about another certifications authorities. So now we will have the ability to determine how we are going to proceed the validations for those different country and manufacturers.
I appreciate that there's a a learning process to go through here of how things are implemented. The the concern that we looked at in implementing with EASA was with the validation process, similar to what you're describing, and the state of operations, accepting fundamentally the document provided from the state of design. There's if we don't have a certification basis identified for the MMEL, then as people transition in and out of the positions, things can move around. And so it's difficult with, especially with a large document like an MMEL, to create a document and submit it and then have a different set of rules than you were expecting that it's being measured against. And so that was part of a fairly long set of discussions between the FAA and EASA for us to come to agreement about how we handle that, so that we don't get into that situation where there's a change in expectations that we didn't understand, especially as you've described. There will be an evolution of what ANAC wants to see in the MMEL, and there will be some differences in policy, and trying to understand how to satisfy that up front as we're preparing documents is important for us to try to do.
Yes, correct. It's our intention to, in terms of MMEL policies, it will be a step-by-step evolution. There won't be a big change all at once. Here we'll have the requirements, because those requirements are really important for us to seek international recognition of Brazilian designs abroad. But it doesn't mean that the way an MMEL approval will change from night to day. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think my last question is then, is there a with validation similar with EASA, with the FAA and others to formalize through the certification process that there is a way to go forward of accepting or approving with a relatively streamlined process between the two involved regulatory agencies?
I don't know if I understood correctly. If your question is about if we have in talks amongst the main authorities, so that there will be some sort of mutual acceptance between these main authorities, so that the validation will be streamlined without further developments or approval. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And for the FAA and EASA, there's the technical implementation procedures, and I think similar type of a document between FAA and the UK CAA has been put in place. So I'm wondering if there is something similar going on with ANAC and the other regulatory agencies.
Yeah, this is actually the first stage here. We need to change the regulation in order to, let's say, to have a basis for seeking further mutual recognition. So that will be in the second stage, but it's part of the implementation part to seek for evolution in the international agreements with FAA and NASA and other authorities.
Okay, thank you. I think that's bad. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the voluntary phase of compliance too, if there's something that we can learn as we go a little further on, but I don't have any specific questions on that for right now.
Okay, anyway, if you still have any doubts after the webinar and during the consultation phase, you can send by email to us. We'll try to answer as soon as possible so that any doubts are clarified before you submit your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have Alvimar Lucena. Lucena, feel free to.
Thank you, Reinaldo. Thank you very much for having this type of presentation in English. I think it's important for the manufacturers that are for the foreign manufacturers, as they are one of the main impacted by the change. Most of the things that I was going to ask Dan already covered, but I have one last concern in a way about the changes. All the changes are related mostly to some items that are not yet covered by any bilateral, I think. Do you think, and this year we'll have later this year a CMT meeting, do you understand that we will have any kind of discussions about this kind of this change on including master MEL and operation evaluation on the discussion during this year, changing bilateral or in the items of this?
I'll ask my colleagues to answer that. The Caetano, Tiago, Fajardo, do you know if it's there's any talk in terms of the CMT agenda for concerning this process here?
Yeah, hi, Reinaldo. Caetano here. Hi, Lucena. Thanks for your question. Actually, under the operational evaluation perspective, as Reinaldo mentioning during his presentation, ANAC participating on the IOEPB, that stands for International Operation Evaluation Practice Board, and it's under the governance of the CMT. So yeah, one of the goals of the IOEPB is to pave the way to establish harmonization and regarding definitions and procedures related to operational evaluation, what would be the OSD flight crew data for the EASA world, and trying to move forward with the intention of establish validation procedures between the authorities. I mean, of course, these CMT discussions have 4 participants, but the procedures will be tailored between pairs of authorities. And the idea is that we have these improvements presented in the IPAs or the TIPs between each pair of authority. So yeah, the idea is to move forward that, and I would add that having specific requirements regarding or related to operational evaluation linked to the part 21, seeing that we gonna from now on gonna have a more structured regulatory framework that will help in this movement, I may say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Caetano.
So thank you. Thank you, Lucena. I don't know if you have any further questions here from the participants in WebEx. Not right now. I received a question here from my colleague Clementino Peras Neto. He works in the safety office of ANAC, and he asked to better define what's a large rotor crash, or what is said, and I'll go back to that requirement here, where here I said in the definition of MML, we say for large rotorcraft, and in Portuguese it's equivalent of large aircraft of rotating wings. And that's basically our RBAC1. It has a definition for what to say it's a large aircraft. It's an aircraft with a maximum takeoff weight of more than 5,670 kilograms. And that's the boundary between Part 23 and Part 25, basically. And when, since we took as a reference the Part 91 requirements when for inoperative items to have as a basis for saying which are the aircraft that in terms of certification requires the MML. We consider the opposite of those aircraft that doesn't matter if there's an MML or not. They could be operated with inoperative items without an approved MEL. So that's why I consider that. So when we say here large rotorcraft, we're not saying that's a Part 29 rotorcraft. It's basically any rotorcraft that has more than 5,670 kilograms of maximum takeoff weight. I don't know if we have any further questions here. Just check the email. There's no contribution here. I'll just make sure that if anyone has any questions, we can just talk right now. Okay, Saurav from Airbus.
Hi, Reinaldo.
Hello, Saurav.
Hello. Well, I do have a couple of questions. Like in the couple of slides before, you were explaining that changes to TC and the submission of changes to TC is going to be a voluntary part from the TC holder. So we here in Airbus, considering a DOA holder, we do a lot of multiple changes in a year. And do you mean that we have to submit on a voluntary basis to ANAC all the changes that we are doing on flight crew data and MMEL for the validations?
Okay, I'll pass that to Tiago, or could you address that?
Hi, Reinaldo. Are you thinking about his question? I assuming these are minor changes, right, Saurav?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or minor changes or even major changes, do you mean that all these kind of changes have to be specifically submitted to EASA for to ANAC for approval?
I'll try to answer that. I don't know. Maybe complement that, Tiago. It's not the intention of ANAC to be involved in the approval of foreign MMELs, and that would be limited to cases in which we have a policy that is more restrictive than the policy from the state of design. So currently, in the first stage, we don't have that right now. So basically, anything from EASA would be acceptable. What is EASA or FAA would be acceptable in the first stage. If later on we have a specific ANAC policy in which our position is more restrictive than the one from the state of design, then that could affect the MML. And in that case, there are two options. Either you could comply with item E of the requirement, in which either demonstrate that the modification do not adversely affect the approved MML, or you could obtain approval on MML supplement covering the modification. But that's one of the options. The other option is just to take credit of the paragraph F, in which you just do nothing, and eventually if ANAC, when that modification eventually comes to ANAC and ANAC identifies that there's a possible impact, then ANAC, depending on the criticality, the affected MML items could be limited, but that would be like only the last option.
Okay, I see. And so in this case, I guess that this is not developed right now, but if this thing is going to develop in the future, which means that the tip is going to be updated to specifically talk about that, okay, these are the things which are more restrictive.
Yes, we have that. Also have the idea is that our MML supplementary instruction makes reference to the policies, and those policies will be available in the ANAC website. And once we have them, then it will be possible for the manufacturers to identify if our position is more restrictive or less restrictive than the one from the state of design.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also, if you classify any modification as basic, generally enactment doesn't involve in any aspect of the project, including MML and the operations evaluation. So any basic modification or minor modification, ANAC will not be involved in any aspect of this. We will accept as the EAS approve the document. Generally, I think that the EASA rule also it is stated that if the modification is classified as minor, the MML is not applied for EASA also.
Okay, thank you, Fajardo. I know, was that clear, sort of? I don't know if you have any further questions.
I just couldn't understand the last part, so sorry.
Okay, I'll try to repeat. I don't know if that'll be easier. What Fajardo just said is that whenever there's a modification from the state, and considering the bilateral agreements between ANAC and NASA or ANAC and FAA, the modifications that are classified as basic and non-basic. Minor modifications would always be basic.
Always basic, yes.
And the other ones, the major ones, if they're basic, ANAC would accept them without minimum or no involvement. So if they're basic, of course, the impact in MML won't be significant for ANAC involvement. And if it's a non-basic change, then that's the situation in which the MML would be would eventually be checked against a difference policy in Brazil.
Okay, understood. But I guess this is the same policy even for flight crew data. This is the same. Talking about basic, non-basic. You're talking the same for flight crew data as well.
I actually don't know if the current bilateral agreement covers flight crew data specifically. I don't know. Caetano, could you answer that one?
Yeah, between ANAC and EASA, there is no formal procedure established, but there are some provisions for saying something like, in the meantime, where the procedures are not well established, authorities are able to request support for validating results for the certification authority. It's a little bit different from what is done on the type certification validation. But yeah, there are some provisions for that. Very, very low level, very low information on that. That's what I was trying to point out when Alvimar Lucena asked about some improvements in the bilateral agreements and technical implementation procedures. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sol. I do not have any further questions. I don't know if that's answered your doubts. Yeah, sorry, you still have the raised hands. I don't know if you want to complement or...
No, it's okay. Thanks.
Oh, it's fine. Okay, any more questions from the audience? Even on WebEx here, I don't see any raised hands. From the inbox here, from the mailbox, we didn't receive any questions. So I'd like to thank your participation and your attention here. And I'd like also to reemphasize that it's very important for also not only the Brazilian professionals and the organizations to submit their opinion in this public consultation, but also the foreign organizations. And that's why we made sure to have the main documents translated into English and also creating this event in English. And in case you still have any doubts to be solved, just send an email and we'll be glad to answer it, and we'll be even more glad if you submit your contributions and your position and the analysis on the impact assessment and on the regulation changes proposed. So thank you, and have a nice afternoon or evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.